Hi, everyone. I'm Paul with MadCap Software. Going to talk in this video about the differences between single bound projects and dual bound projects. So it's actually not that complicated. The single bound project is you just have one source control binding, and that binding could be from Flare to MadCap Central, or it could be from Flare to one of the main source control providers that Flare works with: Git, Perforce, Helix Core, Subversion, or Azure DevOps Team Foundation Server. One of those. So, but you just have one binding, and so you're just working away, doing your regular source control things. And if you want to know all about the different things that you do in source control, got an entirely different video series on Flare. So you go to the MadCap Software website and look for the Flare videos on source control, group of videos on there, and it'll tell you all about the actions that you're doing. Whether you're single bound or dual bound, just all the regular things that you're doing. So that is what I recommend. I recommend that you just have a single binding setup, and that's what I have. I used to have a dual binding setup, but I have since moved to single binding, and mine is just to Central, and it's much more streamlined than a dual bound. It's much easier. So a dual bound setup is where you have, it's just what it sounds like, two bindings instead of one. So you have an initial binding to one of the main four providers, either Git, Perforce, Subversion, or Team Foundation Server, one of those, and then you add a second binding to Central. So the reason why some people might want to do that is just that they're comfortable with that first provider. They've been using it, they're established in it, and they just want to keep doing that, but they want to take advantage of some of the things that you get by binding your project also to Central. And so you can do that. Now, if you have a situation like mine where your first binding would be to Git, I would actually really recommend that you just don't do a dual binding, because they're both using Git. It's the same thing. And by having two bindings, it's just kind of making it a little bit messier. But you can do that. You can do it if you want. All right. And the other thing about the dual bound setup is, if you are using Git, Central will support branches for Git. And so you can do that. You can push branches up to Central. But if you're using one of those other providers, you're not going to be able to get any branching up there. It's just not supported. It's just Git stuff. Okay, so what I'm going to show you in this video, two parts basically. I'm just going to show you how to go from a single binding, add the dual binding, and how it would just work, okay, with you, and maybe even if you've got a team of writers. And then later on, I've got another section where I'm going to show you how to move from a dual binding setup to a single bind setup, which is what I had to do. I was working with dual bound for a long time, and then once branching was supported in Central, I moved to this single binding. Okay, so let's look at both of these sections here. I've got a little project here that's already bound to Git. I used GitHub, and so it's got that first binding. I don't have the second binding yet. So I'm assuming that you have a project, you're already bound to one of the source control providers, and we just want to add this second binding. First thing I would do is just make sure everything is up to date. It's in sync, checked in, pushed, synchronized. Everything's just all good to go. So then the next thing that you do is you just go to View, MadCap Central, you log in. If you're not already logged in, you'll see fields in here to log in, and I am. And all I want to do is just add the second binding. Okay, so I'm just going to click this right here, and that's my license. That's the name of the project. I'm just going to leave this all as it is and click OK. And so you can see this is actually very simple to get into a dual bound setup. Once it finishes here, then the clone of the project will also be up on Central, as well as, I've got the files up on GitHub. Okay, so now it's done, and I can tell because of all of this. And because this is because this is a first get, and then a central binding is the second one. I actually can see both of these by going into the source control ribbon. I can click on one of these buttons, push, pull. And if I click this ellipsis right here, you're going to see, oh, there's both of the bindings. Actually, the UI has changed since I first recorded this video. So I just want to show you how things look now, and it's a little bit easier to do this. So if you want to see your two bindings, yeah, you can go to the Source Control Explorer and select Settings. And in this case, I've got two bindings in here. I've got first one is to Git, and I'm using GitHub, and then I've got MadCap Central. So you can see those, and you can click this thing and you see these two here. You can also go to the project properties and see the same thing. So just one section, there's only one section in here because Git, this is my first binding to Git, this is Central, but they both use Git. And so there's just this one section. And again, click there, there's the two providers. Now, what about if you're not, if you have a binding to one of the other providers and then to Central? Let me show you that. So in this project, my first binding is to Team Foundation Server. My second binding is to Git. So I have two sections. So in the Source Control Explorer, that's how you see your two bindings. In the project properties, it's basically the same. It's just another place to see them. So I see these two sections, Team Foundation Server and Git. So that is the way the interface looks now. When I go through the steps of checking things in, or pushing things, pulling things, committing things. So let's actually just make a quick change in here. I'm going to open up this topic, and I am going to just make a change and save this. All right. And you can see the number down here has changed because I've got something I've got to commit. So I'm just going to put in my comment in here. I'm going to commit this. So I'm just committing this locally. It's not seeing the, the remote locations yet. It's once I go and I do a synchronize, a push or a pull. And now from this dropdown, instead of just one selection, I have two. I've got MadCap Central and Origin. Origin is the default alias that's used for that original Git binding. And so the way that you would normally work in a dual bound setup is you would be synchronizing, you'd be doing your regular work, pushing and pulling from the origin. Okay. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to synchronize with that. So you keep that, everything synced in that first binding. All right. Now let's talk about other writers on your team, because if you're just one person, you can see how simple this was to get set up. Well, what do? Well, what they need to do, it depends on if they have this project already. Do they already have the project that had that original binding? If so, then once you're done and you've bound this to Central, they really just they need to do a pull, okay? And so they'll be pulling it from the origin, from that binding, and so they should get the other binding as well, the MadCap Central binding. Now, if they don't have the project at all, they would import it. They would go through this import from Source Control Wizard, and they would select whatever the first binding is, whether it's Git or whatever one of these others is, and put in the information. You just go through the wizard and they are importing this. And when they're all done, they should have both bindings as well. So as a team, this is what you're doing. The Source Control ribbon up here, because my first binding is to Git. In this case, you're going to see the language up here that has to do with Git. But if my first binding were to Perforce, the buttons and the labels in here would be different because it would be a Perforce thing. So you're using the Source Control ribbon in here to do your stuff. But then what happens is at some point, somebody goes into your Central, your View, MadCap Central window pane, and you just do a push. You do a push up to that second that second binding up to Central. Now, You also need to make sure that people are associated with the project in Central and they have the right permissions. So let's actually go into MadCap Central real quick. So here's my project. And if I go to the projects page in here, you're going to see that is the new one that I just uploaded. Now, I'm the only user associated with it. So if I decided, oh, there's other people that need to be working on this so that they can actually get this binding, or they can do something with this project, I need to go make sure that they're associated with it. And I'm looking in my list of users here in Central. I'm looking for authors, not subject matter experts, not viewers. So I could make Beatrix Kiddo. I could click on her. Okay, so MadCap Central's UI has also changed since I first recorded this video. Let me show you the difference. You get into the user profile and the option is called Access. It used to have a different label on it, but it's called Access now, whether you're in the user profile, dialogue, or teams, or projects profile. And you look here and these things are now in a tree view. So you can expand and collapse them to see what teams and projects are already associated with this person. You want to associate the person with a different team, different project, you click Edit. It shows the teams and projects. I'm going to collapse teams, come down here, and she's already associated with these other projects, but I'm going to also associate her with Austin project. Then I click Save, and she's tied to that project. And now we'll just continue on talking about permissions, because that's another thing that you got to make sure is set up for these users. Permissions, and you got to make sure that they have the right permissions for things. So import poll is going to allow them to get, to import things, to import the project if they need to, or to pull changes from the central remote. Now push, this one you might want to be careful with and not allow everyone to have this if you're in a dual bound setup, because you don't want necessarily everyone to be able to push changes up to central. You want them to be able to pull and push from that first binding, but maybe not to central. You just want one person to do that once everybody's changes are synced. So I might do that. Maybe just limit it to 1 or 2 people who have that permission. And by the way, when you do set these permissions in Central, they can be done at the global level. You could just say, overall, these are what your permissions are, or you can do it according to a project, all right, at the project level. Now, so you give people these permissions. And so in Flare, you guys are all just working through things. And then at some point you go, hey, we really need to update the remote repository on Central. And so you would just make sure everything's in sync, and you would do your push right there. That's really what dual bound is all about. So if you find that that's really where, the kind of setup that you need to be working in, cool, you can do that. But in the next section, I'm going to talk about moving away from a dual bound to a single bound if you have been working in that previously. Let's talk about moving from a dual bound configuration to a single bound setup. In other words, dual bound, one of the 4 main providers, Git, Perforce, Helix Core, Subversion, or Azure DevOps Team Foundation Server. One of those you have as an initial binding. You're bound to that. But then at some point, you also added a second binding to MadCap Central. And now you're thinking, I really don't want that first binding anymore. I want to remove that and just work with Central. Now, you might have a case like I did, where I was bound first to Git, and then my second binding was to MadCap Central. And I wanted to remove that first binding because MadCap Central didn't used to support branching, and now it does. And so there wasn't really any reason for me to have 2 bindings. It's just much simpler to have one. And so I wanted to remove that first one. If you are using one of the other providers, Perforce, Subversion, TFS, you just have to keep in mind that if you are using some sort of branching system there, because most providers, source control providers have some kind of branching. It's just that you're not going to be able to get those up into MadCap Central. That's a get thing. All right. So you can still move from dual bound to single bound if you want. It's just that if you happen to be using some kind of branching thing, you're just going to have to start over and create brand new branches and then just publish them up to MadCap Central. All right. So I am going to take you through this process. Same thing that I did. And it's just a few easy steps. And I'm going to show you the kind of setup that I was using, where the first binding was to get, second binding to MadCap Central, and I removed that first get binding. If you have one of these using one of the other providers, a lot of these steps are very, very similar. The UI is slightly different, but you can get the gist of it by watching this. Here's my project, dual bound. This project's called Austin Dual Bound Get 2. All right. So I first of all want to make sure, because I am using branching. And so if you want to look and see, all right, are all of the branches synced? Are all the changes synced? So you might have a team of authors, and maybe you're the lead person. And so the first thing you want to do is tell everybody, hey, everybody, make sure that all your changes are in, everything is synced with whatever branches you're working on. We just want everybody synced, okay? And then I would just tell them, just chill for a second. Just chill for a little bit while we cut the connection to that first binding to get, and don't make any regular content changes. So the first thing is, after everybody is all synced, all the branches are up to date. So let's actually go see what branches we've got. Go into the source control ribbon, source control explorer, and locally I've got feature 1, feature 2, master, and release. Those just happen to be the names of the 4 branches that I have locally. But I find out that it's not just these branches. There are maybe other writers that have created branches, maybe called feature 3 and feature 4. I just don't have these. Now, you just want to make sure when you're doing this movement from dual bound to single bound that somebody has the most up-to-date version of every branch that you want to keep that moving forward. Now, it doesn't have to be one person, but maybe that's the easiest thing. If I'm the lead writer, maybe I just want to make sure that I get all these, and I tell everybody else, don't worry about it. I'm going to get all the branches and make sure that they're up there. So first thing I probably want to do here is get feature 3 and feature 4 branches. So I am going to go into my branch management dialog, just in source control. I'm going to click here, and I am going to go into remotes, and you can see, all right, I've got MadCap Central because I'm bound there, but it's only the master branch. But I have origin. That is my first binding. That is the alias for that other get binding. And I've got feature 1, 2, 3, 4, master, and release. I need to get feature 3 and feature 4. Well, the first thing that you always want to do really is do a pull. All right, going to do a pull from origin, that first binding. It's just a good thing to do, just to make sure, just in case anybody else has any other branches that were up there remotely that you didn't know about. You want that to populate here in the branch management dialog. You want them all listed here. So there are no secrets. So I need to get feature 3 and feature 4. So I'm going to click on the feature 3 branch, click switch. And now I'm going to click feature 4 and click switch. All right. So now I have those locally here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm good, because now once this is done, I'm going to be able to publish those up to Central, because right now the only branch up on Central is this master one. By the way, if you're wondering, hey, what about the history? You know, I've had all these remote branches and I have got this long history associated with them. What's going to happen to that? Am I going to lose the history? No, you're going to keep your history, because the history actually is a part of your local repository. And so I brought those things down. And so the history is all good to go. Okay. And the Source Control Explorer, if you happen to do what I just did, you brought these things down, you got the new ones, and you're not seeing everything in here, just refresh. Sometimes you have to do that. So I've got feature 3 and feature 4. And now once everything's done, I can publish those. But that's the first part, making everything synced. Make sure somebody has all these local branches. Now, let's actually remove the first binding. And this is very, very simple. So you can actually do this in a couple of places. You can do it in the Source Control Explorer, go into settings, and you see this unbind button right here, or you can go into project properties, project ribbon over here, project properties. Okay, hold on there, Sparky. Things have changed once again in the UI. So I just want to show you the up-to-date version of how you would remove these bindings. All right, yes, you can do it in a couple of places. Source Control Explorer, come in here to settings. This project, first binding is to Git origin. You see there in the second binding to Central. So I could do it from here. You get the same kind of UI in project properties and right here. Now, if you have this kind of a setup, if you click unbind provider, you're going to get this message and it's going to say, hey, you're going to be removing your binding from Central. That's not what we want. We want to remove the binding from just origin, the first binding. So we click this little ellipsis and we select origin and remove and click OK. And then we click and you can see it's just left the Central binding, doesn't have the other one. Click OK. Okay, so that's it. That's how it's done with a Git Central binding. Now, I also want to show you how it's just a little bit different with one of the other third-party tools. In this case, I'm going to show you Team Foundation Server is the first binding and Git and Central is the second. So let me open up that project. So in a situation like this, there's two different sections here in the Source Control Explorer. There's Centrals, and this is Team Foundation Server. And in project properties, same thing. Team Foundation Server, Git. Now, in this case, I can just click Unbind Provider next to Team Foundation Server. It's going to remove that. And I click OK. And you can see I just have this one binding now to Central. So that is how it works in the updated UI. Let's go back into our branch dialog here, and you see remotes. Now I just have MadCap Central. I don't have the origin stuff. And once I publish all of these other things up to that remote, so I can go into Source Control Explorer, go into branches, and I can publish not just feature 3 and feature 4 up there, but all these other ones as well. So I can just click on feature 3, publish branch. Now I just have this one binding, say, okay, I'm going to publish that one up there. And if you already have had these local branches in here, see what happened was it refreshed now. Now it's recognizing that other binding. It's like, hey, you gotta republish these things. And so I'm just gonna go through each one of these and republish them so that they are up on MadCap Central. And even the master one over here, I'm gonna do that as well, just to make sure that I have the latest there. And you just go through this, and now you're just going to have this one binding from Central, or from Flare to MadCap Central. And it's just much more streamlined. So if you, and I'm just going to keep going through while I'm talking and publishing all these others. Now you got you got this other team of writers. You just have them do the same thing. Just have them go to the branch or to the project properties, and you just tell them to remove that first binding, and it's just gone. And here's the thing. If you are worried about it, if you're really, really worried about this, just remember that other repository, the original binding, it's still there, unless you happen to, like this one is to GitHub. Unless I went up to GitHub and removed the repository, it's still there. And if I wanted to, I could go tie it back in. I could connect it once again if I really wanted to. But I think you're going to find once you remove that binding, things are just going to be much simpler in here. So now I go into branch, and there are my local branches. There are the remote branches. Everything is much simpler. We've gone from dual bound to single bound. So when it comes to single bound versus dual bound, really, here's what I have to say. If you can, do a single bound. Going to make your life easier. If you have to do dual bound, then no problem. You can do that. Probably the hardest part is if you have a team of writers, making sure everybody's set up, got everything. Go into the help, into the online help. It's all documented in there. And if you're still having problems, just contact tech support. They'll help you get set up. And then once you are in that dual bound setup, then everybody just works as usual. Really, you're focusing on that first binding, and it's every once in a while you push just one person pushes up to central, really. And if you want to move away from that, it's not that scary. It's going to retain your history. You're going to be good. Okay, so that's going to do it for this video. We'll see you in the next video in this series.